Hello and welcome to another UK Gaming Network podcast. I'm Zoidberg, and this week we've been suffering from a major case of deja vu, as we've been playing The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening on the Switch. This has inspired us to think about video game remakes, and what is it that makes a good one? We've seen all kinds over the years, from basic reskins that leave the original game untouched, warts and all, to complete reimaginings like Capcom's Resident Evil 2 from January this year. Both are perfectly viable, but for us, the way Nintendo have approached this latest Zelda release strikes the perfect balance between new and old. It's taken what was already a great game and given it a shiny new paint job. This is one of the nicest looking games we've seen all year. Everything in the game, from characters to the houses to the trees, looks like you could reach into your TV and pick it up. They also recognise that the original game wasn't perfect, and set about trying to fix its flaws. The biggest revisions, apart from the visuals, are to the overworld, which now fully scrolls rather than being flick screen, although the map does remain identical. And the extra buttons make the controls a lot less fiddly. There are also a few new features like being able to place markers on the map screen to help you remember where things are, and a dungeon editor that allows you to place rooms from any completed dungeon in any arrangement that you like, and these can then be uploaded for others to play. It's not quite Mario Maker, but it's a nice addition all the same. Nintendo are, of course, no strangers to re-releasing old games on newer systems, and changing them to suit. Dating right back to Super Mario All-Stars on the SNES, we've never been able to resist these repackaged re-releases. It's not just Nintendo either. Microsoft had great success with the Halo Master Chief Collection, and more recently Crash Bandicoot has been back at the top of the charts after 20 years. Nostalgia is big business for gamers, and as long as we keep buying them, remakes will continue to be made. If they inspire new players to seek out the originals as well, then that's just a bonus. Here are 5 other great games with even better remakes. Metroid Zero Mission. Metroid Zero Mission imagines what the original Metroid would have been like if it had all the same features as Super Metroid. Save rooms, a minimap to aid navigation, and the ability to fire your weapons diagonally are just some of the things that Metroid fans now take for granted, and that the original game didn't have. Zero Mission has them all, and so much more, including some nicely animated cutscenes. The improved visuals, boss fights and controls make it one of the best games ever released for the Game Boy Advance. The only misstep was the decision to give away the big reveal about Samus Aran's gender in the opening cinematic.
Well, here we are. What now?
Monkey Island 2 Special Edition.
I'll dive in and look for the sunken gap.
When it came to remaking the Monkey Island games for their console releases in 2009 and 2010 respectively, all the effort went into making them look and sound better than ever. The graphics were completely redrawn, the music remixed, and the voices re-recorded. To sell just how much has changed, you can switch between the original and new versions at the touch of a button, and if some characters don't sound quite as we'd imagine them in our heads, the line delivery makes some jokes land better than ever. They also introduced a hint system if you get stuck on some of the more obscure puzzles. Oddworld New and Tasty. Playing New and Tasty, you get the impression that this was the game Oddworld inhabitants always wanted to make. They were just held back by the limitations of the PS1 hardware. The way that the 2D levels blended seamlessly with the 3D cutscenes was impressive back in 1997, and this was even more pronounced in the remake. The HD visuals allow you to get a better look at the fantastic world, character and creature design, and the gameplay remains as good as ever. There are a number of new sections to discover and 200 more fellow prisoners to rescue, making it well worth playing even if you've completely finished the original. Coming next year we're getting Soulstorm, a remake of the sequel Abe's Exodus, and if it turns out as well as this did, we're in for a treat. Prince of Persia Classic. Released in 2007, Prince of Persia Classic gave the game a graphical overhaul to bring the look more in line with Ubisoft's Sands of Time trilogy, but it also kept the actual level design intact. That in itself would make it a decent remake, but the developers at Gameloft went even further. The Prince now has a number of new moves at his disposal, like being able to vault up and off walls and do a backflip over gaps. These make climbing around the levels even more enjoyable than before. Combat is also vastly improved, with a new slow-mo dodge if timed correctly, and it still punishes you every time you get too cocky. It's still the thing that stops me from completing survival mode to this day. Spyro Reignited Trilogy. In remaking Insomniac's Spyro the Dragon trilogy, developer Toys for Bob not only atoned for what they did to the lovable dragon in Skylanders, but they also set the gold standard by which all future remakes will be judged. All 3 games were given a shiny new coat of paint, with improved animation, particularly on Spyro himself, and fantastic world detail, but it was the completely redesigned and revoiced dragons from the first game that impressed the most. The new controls, which gave us full control over the camera, actually made some sections slightly easier than we remembered, especially the chase sections that had frustrated us so much back in the 90s. The only downside is that by including the entire trilogy, there are no more good Spyro games for them to remake. Now it's time to take a look at some new games with this week's reviews. It's been 5 years since the last game in the Borderlands series, and 8 since the last developed by Gearbox themselves, so to say we've been waiting a long time for Borderlands 3 would be underselling it. I had been worried that Borderlands 3 would attempt to introduce a live service model and be more like Destiny, but I'm pleased to report that this is not the case. More of the same is exactly what fans of the series wanted, and that's just what's been delivered. Small improvements have been made too. Ammo and cash is now collected automatically if you need it, and you can change the active quest with a quick tap of the D-pad. No need to keep accessing the menus every time. With a great cast of characters, interesting locations to visit, and refined gameplay, this is an easy game to recommend for fans of shooters. It also has none of the bloat that many modern games suffer from. Untitled Goose game from Australian developer House House is a game that may only take a couple of hours to finish, but you'll be entertained for every minute that you play it, and you'll find yourself coming back for more. Its very simple premise is that you're a goose, and you have to cause as much misery as possible for all humans you encounter. This is achieved in all manner of ways, and it's usually a case of observing them and picking your ideal moment to strike. There's only a limited number of things that you can interact with in each area, and you're given a vague checklist of things to do, but it's hugely enjoyable to just play around and see what's possible. If you'd told me before playing that the best stealth game of the year would have you controlling a goose, I'd have laughed you out of the room. But that's exactly what this is, and I would encourage everyone to play it for themselves. What can I say about FIFA 20? Having played it for a few hours, I can confirm that it's still FIFA, and I'm still bored by it. However, if you liked it last year, you'll probably like it this year. Like all yearly sports games, it's full of small incremental changes that casual fans won't even notice, wrapped up in the usual impeccable EA Sports presentation. Although it must be said the match commentary seems to have gotten slightly worse this year. Of the new features, the best is undoubtedly the street football, which is actually a lot more enjoyable than the main game itself. As the main game gets more and more realistic, the less interested I am in actually playing it, but Volta Football does a more immediate and enjoyable take on the sport that I'd probably recommend even if it was a separate release, and it finally means that I can put away my copy of FIFA Street. At the end of the day though, if you own FIFA 19, there's simply no point buying this one. The Sojourn is a first-person puzzle game with a very simple set of rules that the developers have used to create a series of challenging chambers that constantly make you think in different ways. It's quite relaxing to play and does a great job of introducing each new mechanic, even if it never really grabs your attention in the same way as similar games. The Turing Test, Cube and, yes, Portal all have disembodied voices talking to you throughout, which helps to keep you invested, but this has nothing. Having someone say the occasional bits of text that appeared on screen instead of having to read them would have improved things quite a bit. It's also twice the length of all those games, clocking in at around 4 hours when you know what you're doing, and consequently it gets a bit boring in the latter stages. At the end of the day though, that doesn't mean it's not worth playing. There have been attempts to make Contra games in 3D before, but even if you found yourself disappointed by the likes of Neo Contra, nothing can prepare you for just how terrible and misjudged Contra Road Corps is. Instead of being an arcade game, this is broken up into missions that are accessed from a hub. Every level looks the same, which is to say that the graphics would have been seriously subpar last generation, and the playable characters are completely free of charisma. All of this could be forgiven if the gameplay was fun, but it's not in any way. Bosses constantly repeat between levels, and having to switch between your weapons constantly due to guns overheating goes against the spirit of Contra. If you are in any way curious about how it plays, Konami have been kind enough to release a free demo, so that you don't have to spend £37 for the privilege. If you want a bit of proper Contra style action, get Blazing Chrome instead, and if you want a thrilling twin stick shooter, get Nex Machina. We'll end this week's show in the usual way with our retro game of the week. Out now on PlayStation 4 and Nintendo Switch is a new version of Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast. One of the best Star Wars games ever made, this Raven Software developed game was first released on the PC back in 2002, and continued the adventures of rogue mercenary cum Jedi Kyle Katarn. The first third of the game is an entertaining first-person shooter as you make your way around an Imperial base blasting stormtroopers left and right as you hunt for secrets and hidden routes. Once you obtain a lightsaber though, it gets even better and becomes almost a different game entirely, focusing on close quarters combat and force powers. Sadly though, this re-release seems to be based on the console version, which reminds us of a time when all console first-person shooters were vastly inferior ports of PC games. Even playing it now, it's obvious that it was designed to be played with a mouse and keyboard, and not a controller, as aiming is nowhere near as accurate as it needs to be. For only £8 though, it's still worth a go, if only to remind yourself of how good Star Wars games could get ahead of the November release of Fallen Order. That brings us to the end of another podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Drop us a line in the comments about game remakes you like the most, and I'll be back next week where we'll be taking a look at what's available on Apple Arcade, as well as reviewing the likes of Code Vein and The Surge 2. Make sure you give us a like and subscribe so that you don't miss it. And remember to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at UK Gaming Network. Until then, thanks for listening. Bye for now.